The Fall of Rome, Alaric and the Unthinkable Siege. On a misty summer morning in 410 CE, as the sun crept over Rome's 7 hills, Alaric the Goth stood before the Salarian gate and watched the impossible become reality. The Eternal City, unconquered for 8 centuries, seat of emperors, heart of civilization itself, was falling to a man the Romans had once dismissed as a mere barbarian. But Alaric was far more than that. He was a military genius who had learned Rome's own tactics against her, a political mastermind who played emperors like game pieces, and a visionary who saw beyond the simple labels of Roman and barbarian to imagine a new kind of kingdom. This is the story of how a boy, born on a remote island in the Danube, rose to shake the foundations of the greatest empire the world had ever known. It's a tale of betrayal and ambition, of cultural transformation and the dying gasps of an ancient order. But most of all, it's the story of a leader who straddled 2 worlds, the traditional tribal life of his Gothic ancestors and the glittering but decadent civilization of imperial Rome, and used that unique perspective to change the course of history forever. The birth of Alaric, a Gothic legacy. The winter of 370 was bitter, even by the standards of the Danube Delta. On Puce Island, where the mighty river's waters met the Black Sea in a maze of reed-choked channels, a Gothic mother gave birth to a child who would one day make emperors tremble. The boy was named Alaric, meaning ruler of all, though none could have guessed how prophetic that name would prove. The Visigoths of Puce lived as they had for generations, proud warriors and traders who had built a prosperous kingdom along Rome's frontier, maintaining an uneasy peace with the empire that loomed to the south. Young Alaric's earliest memories were of sword practice with wooden blades, the smell of horses, and the stories of tribal elders around evening fires. They spoke of the great Gothic king Athanaric's victories, of raids and treaties with Rome, and of the ancient migrations that had brought their people to these lands. But they also told darker tales, whispers of a fierce people far to the east, the Huns who rode like demons and conquered all in their path. Even as a child, Alaric learned to sleep with one ear tuned to danger. The boy showed an uncanny talent for leadership from his earliest years. During mock battles with other children, he demonstrated not just courage but cunning, learning to outflank his opponents, rather than merely overwhelming them with force. More unusually for a Gothic youth, he was fascinated by the Roman world. When merchants visited Puce, he would pepper them with questions about the empire's cities, armies, and customs. He learned Latin alongside his native Gothic and studied Roman military formations with the same intensity other boys reserved for hunting. Yet Alaric's childhood was not all preparation for war. The Visigoths were sophisticated people, with their own written language, complex social hierarchies, and rich artistic traditions. He learned to appreciate fine metalwork from Gothic craftsmen, to honor the old tribal gods while respecting the growing influence of Christianity among his people, and to navigate the intricate web of tribal politics. His father, a minor noble, encouraged him to understand both the strength of Gothic traditions and the importance of adaptation in a changing world. But change was coming faster than anyone expected. In the summer of 376, when Alaric was barely 6 years old, the first refugees arrived from the east. They brought terrifying tales of the Hunnic advance, entire villages put to the sword, armies scattered like leaves in a storm. The peaceful trading life of Puce Island was about to end, and with it, Alaric's childhood. The boy who would one day sack Rome was about to learn his first harsh lessons about survival in a world where neither birth nor tradition could guarantee safety. The Great Migration was beginning, and with it, the transformation of both Alaric and the Roman world he would one day shake to its foundations. The Great Migration. The fall of the Thervingi. The Hunnic storm broke over the Gothic kingdoms in the summer of 376 with the force of a tidal wave. Alaric, watching from the relative safety of Puce Island, saw the first signs of catastrophe in the endless stream of refugees. They came in their thousands, warriors without weapons, nobles without gold, families without homes. The proud Thervingi, who had stood as Rome's equal for generations, were becoming beggars at the empire's door. The decision that would shape Alaric's life came with brutal swiftness. The Gothic king Fritigern, facing annihilation, made an unprecedented request to Emperor Valens, sanctuary within Roman territory for the entire Gothic people. The Romans, seeing an opportunity to gain cheap soldiers and laborers, agreed. What followed was chaos. At the designated crossing point near Durostorum, Roman ships ferried countless Gothic families across the Danube, day and night. Young Alaric, in the crush of humanity, witnessed scenes that would haunt him forever. Children separated from parents in the panic, the elderly left behind, proud warriors humiliated by Roman guards who confiscated their weapons. The resettlement quickly revealed itself as a trap. Roman officials, rather than providing the promised supplies, sold dog meat to starving Gothic families at extortionate prices. Corrupt administrators pocketed the food budget while refugees died of hunger. Alaric, despite his youth, absorbed a crucial lesson. Rome's power rested not on honor, but on ruthless pragmatism. He watched as Gothic women sold themselves into slavery to feed their children, while Roman merchants grew fat on misery. The breaking point came at a feast in Marcianople. Gothic leaders, invited to dine with Roman officials, discovered an assassination plot against them. The ensuing battle turned resettlement into revolt. Alaric, though still too young to fight, saw the Goths transform from refugees to rebels. They seized Roman weapons, raided arsenals, and began a guerrilla campaign that would shake the empire. Fritigern, outmaneuvered politically, proved brilliant at asymmetric warfare. His forces melted into forests, struck at supply lines, and gradually built an army from the very people Rome had hoped to enslave. The culmination came at Adrianople in 378, where Alaric, now old enough to serve as a messenger, witnessed Gothic cavalry crush the Roman legions. Emperor Valens himself died on the field, and with him died the myth of Roman invincibility. For Alaric, it was an epiphany. The Goths had beaten Rome not by matching its legions in traditional battle, but by adapting, learning Roman tactics while maintaining their own strengths. This hybrid warfare, combining Gothic mobility with Roman discipline, would become the cornerstone of his own military genius. Rising through Roman ranks, Alaric's meteoric ascent. Beneath the golden eagles of Rome's legions, a 19-year-old Alaric learned that power speaks its own language. The new emperor, Theodosius III, had done what his predecessors could not: turned enemies into assets. By 389, the same Gothic warriors who had humbled Rome at Adrianople were fighting under Roman standards, and among them, Alaric was ascending like a meteor through the ranks. In the glittering world of Constantinople, Alaric moved with the grace of a natural diplomat. His command of Latin and Greek matched his skill with a sword, while his Gothic heritage gave him unique leverage. Among Roman officers, he was the civilized barbarian they could trust to command his people. Among his fellow Goths, he remained one of their own, never forgetting the harsh lessons of the crossing. This dual identity made him invaluable to Theodosius, who needed commanders who could bridge both worlds. The campaign against the usurper Eugenius in 394 proved Alaric's defining moment. At the Battle of the Frigidus River, where the fate of the empire hung in balance, Theodosius placed him in command of the Gothic auxiliary forces. The emperor's Roman generals, particularly Stilicho, watched with barely concealed disdain as their barbarian colleague led the vanguard. What followed was either tactical brilliance or calculated betrayal, depending on who told the story. Alaric's Gothic forces bore the brunt of the fighting, suffering massive casualties while securing victory. But those casualties conveniently eliminated many of his potential rivals among the Gothic nobility, leaving him as the clear leader of his people. In the battle's aftermath, Alaric made an unprecedented demand of Theodosius, a general's commission in the regular Roman army. The request exposed the fault lines in Rome's relationship with its Gothic allies. Despite their sacrifices, despite their loyalty, they remained second-class citizens in Roman eyes. Theodosius, master of diplomatic compromise, hesitated. That hesitation would prove costly. By year's end, Theodosius was dead, and the empire split between his sons, the weak-willed Honorius in the west and the young Arcadius in the east. Alaric, his ambitions thwarted and his people's blood spent for Roman glory, made a decision that would alter the course of history. If Rome would not grant him power, he would take it. The loyal auxiliary commander began his transformation into something far more dangerous, a king who understood Rome's weaknesses from the inside and had the will to exploit them. The rise of Alaric, king of the Visigoths. The election that made Alaric king of the Visigoths took place in 395 on a blood-soaked field outside Thessalonica. His fellow warriors raised him on a shield in the ancient Gothic tradition, their swords clashing against their armor in rhythm with the chant of his name. But this was no mere tribal chieftain they were elevating. This was a man who had mastered the arts of both Roman and Gothic warfare, who spoke the language of emperors and slaves alike, and who harbored ambitions far greater than his predecessors could have imagined. His first act as king revealed the scope of those ambitions. Rather than leading his people back to the frontier, Alaric marched them straight into Greece, the cultural heart of the Eastern Roman Empire. His army moved with devastating precision through Thrace and Macedonia, bypassing heavily fortified cities to strike at wealthy, undefended targets. But unlike the plundering raids of old, Alaric's campaign followed a sophisticated strategy. He seized key mountain passes, secured supply lines, and systematically dismantled the region's defensive network. Athens, faced with his approach, chose negotiation over destruction. The city's scholars were startled to find themselves discussing philosophy and history with a barbarian king who quoted Homer and debated the finer points of strategy with their generals. The Eastern Empire's response revealed the chaos following Theodosius's death. While the child emperor Arcadius's court debated in Constantinople, Alaric's forces methodically stripped Greece of its wealth and military resources. Each victory brought more recruits to his banner, not just Goths, but disaffected Romans, escaped slaves, and ambitious mercenaries. He was building something unprecedented, an army that was neither fully Roman nor fully Gothic, but a new hybrid force bound by personal loyalty to its charismatic king. Yet Alaric's most remarkable achievement in these years was not military, but political. He transformed the Visigoths from a loose confederation of tribal bands into a unified people with a clear purpose. His court combined Gothic martial traditions with Roman administrative efficiency. He minted his own coins, appointed his own officials, and began to craft the framework of what looked increasingly like a portable state. When he finally did negotiate with Constantinople, it was not as a barbarian chief seeking tribute, but as the ruler of an emerging kingdom demanding recognition. By 397, even his enemies had to acknowledge the new reality. The boy who had crossed the Danube as a refugee had become a king who could dictate terms to emperors. Alaric had created something entirely new in the space between Roman and barbarian worlds, and he was about to use this creation to shake the empire to its foundations. The players were in position, the stakes were set, and the great game for the future of Rome was about to begin. The rivalry of Stilicho and Alaric, a clash in Roman history. The two most powerful men in the Roman world first faced each other across a battlefield in Thessaly in 397. Stilicho, the half-Vandal guardian of Western Emperor Honorius, had cornered Alaric's forces in the rocky peninsulas of Greece. Victory seemed certain, until Alaric somehow slipped his entire army through Stilicho's lines in the dead of night, vanishing like mist through the mountain passes. Thus began one of history's most fascinating military rivalries, a decade-long chess match between two brilliant generals who had far more in common than either would admit. Like a pair of master duelists, Alaric and Stilicho circled each other across the breadth of the Roman world. Their confrontations followed a pattern. Stilicho would gather overwhelming force, Alaric would find an unexpected escape route, then counter with a bold move of his own. When Stilicho claimed the loyalty of Eastern Emperor Arcadius, Alaric promptly had himself appointed Master of Soldiers in Illyricum. When Alaric threatened Italy, Stilicho bought him off with gold and promises, only to use the breathing room to strengthen his defenses. Neither man could quite destroy the other, and perhaps more tellingly, neither seemed entirely willing to try. The truth was that each needed the other. Stilicho used the threat of Alaric to maintain his grip on power in Rome, while Alaric used Stilicho's complex political position to extract ever greater concessions. Their wars began to resemble elaborate theater, with armies maneuvering impressively, but rarely engaging in decisive battle. The Roman Senate grumbled about collusion, but could prove nothing. Meanwhile, both men grew stronger, Stilicho gathering more power in the west, Alaric building his hybrid kingdom in the east. The delicate balance shattered in 408, when a palace coup in Ravenna led to Stilicho's execution. Alaric, receiving the news in his camp, was said to have remarked, "The Romans have cut off their own right hand with their left." He immediately set his army in motion toward Italy. Without Stilicho to oppose him, or to negotiate with him, Alaric was free to pursue his greatest ambition. The road to Rome itself now lay open. The Siege of Rome, Alaric's advance. In the autumn of 408, Rome faced something it hadn't seen in 8 centuries, a hostile army at its gates. Alaric's forces materialized on the horizon like a mirage, settling into siege positions with practiced efficiency. The Senate, meeting in emergency session, found their situation almost incomprehensible. How could barbarians threaten the eternal city? Yet there they were, and at their head was a man who knew Rome's weaknesses better than the Romans themselves. Alaric's first siege was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Rather than attempting to storm the walls, he simply seized control of the Tiber and Rome's port at Ostia, cutting off the grain supply. Then he waited. Inside the city, panic turned to hunger, and hunger to desperation. The Senate sent out negotiators, offering gold, silver, and silk. Alaric dismissed them with a chilling laugh. When they demanded to know what would satisfy him, his answer became legendary. Your gold, your silver, your movable property, your barbarian slaves. When the frustrated negotiators asked what that would leave for the citizens of Rome, he gave them 4 words: your lives, if that. The following 2 years became a deadly dance of sieges, negotiations, and betrayals. Alaric raised and deposed a puppet emperor, Priscus Attalus. He negotiated with the legitimate Emperor Honorius, safely hidden behind the marshes of Ravenna. 3 times he besieged Rome, each time demonstrating more power over the city's fate. Yet he consistently showed restraint, seeking a legitimate position within the Roman system, rather than mere destruction. He wanted recognition as master of soldiers, lands for his people, and grain supplies, reasonable demands that Honorius, in his arrogance, repeatedly rejected. By August 410, Alaric's patience had run out. In a final irony, Rome fell not to a grand assault, but to treachery from within. Slaves opened the Salarian Gate in the dead of night, and Alaric's army poured into the sleeping city. The sack that followed was unlike anything in history: disciplined, selective, and strangely respectful. Christian churches were declared sanctuaries and protected. Art and architecture were largely preserved. The violence, while real, was restrained by Alaric's direct orders. This was not mindless destruction, but a calculated demonstration of power. For 3 days, the capital of civilization lay in the hands of a man it had once dismissed as a barbarian. But this barbarian quoted Virgil, respected classical culture, and understood the symbolic power of mercy. When his army finally withdrew, laden with treasure, they left behind a city that was humbled but largely intact. Rome had fallen, but Alaric had ensured it fell with dignity. The world would never be the same. Legacy of Alaric, the Conqueror's final chapter. History's greatest ironies often reveal themselves in death. For Alaric, who had conquered the eternal city itself, the end came not in glorious battle, but from a fever during his march south. In late 410, as his army moved through Calabria toward Sicily, the conqueror of Rome fell ill near the small town of Cosenza. His final commands revealed the complex duality that had defined his life. He ordered his men to bury him with the treasures of Rome, but in a way that merged Roman grandeur with Gothic tradition. The burial they gave him became legend. His warriors diverted the Busento River by forcing captives to dig a new channel. In the dry riverbed, they dug a tomb and lined it with gold and Roman treasures. They buried their king in full armor atop his horse, surrounded by the spoils of his greatest victory. Then they redirected the river back to its course, forever hiding the grave beneath its waters. The captives who had done the work were executed to ensure the location would remain secret for eternity. To this day, despite centuries of searching, Alaric's grave remains undiscovered beneath the Busento's flowing waters. But Alaric's true legacy wasn't in gold or hidden treasures. It was in the transformation he had set in motion. His achievements fundamentally altered the relationship between Romans and barbarians. The Visigoths, under his successor Athaulf, would go on to establish the first independent Germanic kingdom within the empire's borders in southern Gaul. This became the model for all the kingdoms that would follow, eventually transforming the Western Roman Empire into medieval Europe. More subtly, Alaric had created something entirely new, a hybrid political entity that was neither fully Roman nor fully Gothic, but a sophisticated blend of both. His success proved that the future belonged not to those who clung to old identities, but to those who could forge new ones. The medieval kingdoms that emerged from Rome's ashes would all follow this pattern, combining Roman administration with Germanic military prowess. In the end, Alaric's greatest victory wasn't the sack of Rome. It was proving that civilization didn't flow only one way. Rome had long assumed that barbarians could only learn from Romans, never the reverse. Alaric showed that power could flow from the periphery to the center, that outsiders could master and transform the very civilization that sought to exclude them. In doing so, he didn't just change Rome, he created the blueprint for a new world. As the waters of the Busento flow over his hidden grave, they continue to whisper the lesson Alaric taught. Empires may seem eternal, but the future belongs to those who can imagine something new.